For 23 years, the small town of Willow Creek, South Carolina, carried a quiet wound that never quite healed. In the spring of 1991, a little girl named Hannah Brooks vanished without a trace from the only world she had ever known. The search that followed would become one of the largest and most desperate manhunts in the state's history. Thousands of volunteers would scour miles of pine forests and back roads. Investigators would chase down hundreds of leads that went cold, and a family would be forever frozen. In the moment they realized their youngest child was gone. What no one could have imagined was that Hannah Brooks was alive the entire time, breathing, growing, living under a different name, in a different state, with no memory of the home and family that never stopped searching for her. This is the story of how a mystery that seemed impossible to solve was cracked open by a twist of fate, modern technology, and the stubborn persistence of people who refused to let a child be forgotten. This is the story of Hannah Brooks. Before we dive deeper, if you're enjoying these deep dives into unsolved and sometimes solved mysteries, make sure to like this video, share it with a friend who loves true crime, and subscribe to Unsolved Stories for more stories like this one. Turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. I read them all. The spring of 1991 came to Willow Creek with the kind of gentle warmth that made kids restless and parents thankful for longer days. This was before cell phones, before Amber Alerts, before GPS, before the internet turned every stranger into a potential source of information or danger. In towns like Willow Creek, life moved slower. Neighbors knew each other's names, children played outside until the streetlights flickered on, doors stayed unlocked. The biggest worry for most parents was whether their kids would come home with muddy shoes or a scraped knee. Hannah Brooks was 6 years old that spring. A bright, curious first grader with wavy brown hair she wore in loose ponytails and a smile that showed the gap where her front tooth had just fallen out. She was the baby of the Brooks family, the youngest of 3 children born to Tom and Laura Brooks. Tom worked as a mechanic at a local garage, often coming home with grease under his nails but always in time for dinner. Laura was a part-time bookkeeper at a small accounting firm, which gave her the flexibility to handle school runs and after-school activities. The older siblings were 11-year-old Caleb, who was obsessed with skateboarding and spent hours perfecting tricks in the driveway, and 9-year-old Grace, who loved reading and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. The Brooks family lived in a modest 2-story house on Elmwood Avenue, a quiet street lined with oak trees and front yards dotted with bikes and basketball hoops. Their home was cozy, filled with the sounds of family, life, laughter from the living room, the clatter of dishes, the hum of a ceiling fan on summer evenings. Laura kept a vegetable garden in the backyard, and Tom had built a simple treehouse that the kids fought over. Hannah's room was painted soft lavender with posters of horses and a shelf full of stuffed animals. Her favorite was a floppy-eared bunny named Mr. Whiskers, which she carried everywhere. Hannah was the kind of child teachers remembered fondly. Her first-grade teacher, Mrs. Callahan, later told investigators that Hannah was always eager to help, passing out crayons, volunteering to clean the whiteboard, raising her hand with thoughtful questions. She had a small group of close friends at school, girls she played hopscotch with at recess and traded stickers with at lunch. Her favorite pretend game was Zoo, where she'd assign each friend an animal and narrate their adventures in imaginary habitats. At home, Hannah was talkative and affectionate. She trailed her mother around the house, asking endless questions. Why do clouds float? How do birds know where to go in winter? She adored her older siblings, even when they teased her, and she especially loved when her dad let her sit on his lap while he read the newspaper. The Brooks family wasn't rich, but they were happy. They took weekend trips to the nearby lake, celebrated birthdays with homemade cakes, and attended the local Baptist church every Sunday. Tom coached Caleb's Little League team, and Laura helped organize the school book fair. They were the kind of family that made small-town life feel safe and predictable. April 24, 1991, was a typical Thursday. Laura woke the kids at 6:45, made oatmeal and toast, and drove them to school in the family's blue minivan. Tom had already left for work, his lunch in a metal box, his thermos filled with black coffee. The morning routine was so familiar, it felt automatic. Laura dropped the children off at Willow Creek Elementary, kissing each one goodbye. Hannah was especially excited that day. She'd been working on a class project about farm animals, and she'd brought in a drawing of a cow she'd colored with her best crayons. She waved enthusiastically from the sidewalk before running inside. The school day passed normally. Hannah finished her farm drawing, played tag at recess with her friend Sophie, and ate her peanut butter sandwich at lunch, trading her carrot sticks for Sophie's fruit snacks. Mrs. Callahan later recalled that Hannah seemed perfectly happy and engaged. No signs of distress, no unusual behavior. School let out at 3:15. Most days, Laura picked up all three kids, but on Thursdays, Caleb had soccer practice until 4:30, and Grace stayed after school for choir rehearsal. So Laura had arranged for Hannah to walk the half-mile home with a neighbor girl, Olivia Grant, who was in second grade. Olivia's mother, Mrs. Grant, would watch both girls until Laura got off work at 4:45. This arrangement had worked for months. It was common in Willow Creek. Kids walked home in pairs or groups, and neighbors looked out for one another. But on that Thursday, something went terribly wrong. Olivia left school at the usual time and walked home alone. When she arrived, Mrs. Grant asked, "Where's Hannah?" Olivia shrugged. "I looked for her after the bell, but I couldn't find her. I thought maybe her mom picked her up early." Mrs. Grant felt a small knot of worry but tried to stay calm. She called the Brooks house. No answer. She called Laura's office and was told Laura had already left to pick up Caleb. Growing anxious, she called Tom at the garage. "Tom, is Hannah with you?" she asked. There was a long pause. "No," Tom said slowly. "She's supposed to be at your house with Olivia." That was the moment the world tilted. Tom dropped everything and drove home. Mrs. Grant called the school, but the office was closed for the day. By 3:45, Tom and Laura had both arrived. At the Grant house, their faces pale, voices tight with fear. "Maybe she walked straight home," Laura said, clinging to the hope. They raced back to Elmwood Avenue, bursting through the front door, calling Hannah's name. The house was empty. They checked every room, the backyard, the treehouse, the garage. Nothing. Laura called every friend Hannah had, every mother whose number she had. No one had seen her. At 4:20, Tom called 911. His voice shook as he spoke to the dispatcher. "My daughter's missing. She didn't come home from school. No one knows where she is." Within minutes, patrol cars arrived. Officer James Harlan was the first on scene. He found Tom and Laura on the front porch, holding each other, looking like they'd been punched. Harlan, a father of two, felt his stomach drop. He'd handled missing child calls before. Most ended quickly, kids wandering to a friend's house or hiding somewhere. But the raw fear in these parents' eyes told him this might be different. Harlan walked them through the timeline. Last seen at school dismissal, supposed to walk with Olivia, no sign since 3:15. No family issues, no reason to run away. Hannah was responsible, cautious, familiar with the route. More officers arrived, the house filled with radios and uniforms. Sergeant Evelyn Carter, who would become the lead investigator, took charge at 4:50. She organized immediate searches. Officers canvassed the route from school to home, door to door. Others checked nearby parks, ditches, wooded areas. The school was reopened for a search. Teachers were called back, students were interviewed. No one had seen anything unusual. By 5:30, volunteers began showing up. Neighbors, church members, parents from the school. Sergeant Carter assigned them areas to cover. They spread out, calling Hannah's name, checking sheds and garages. The local news station was alerted. By the 6-hour broadcast, Hannah's school photo was on every TV in the region, a smiling 6-year-old in a yellow dress with a white collar, brown hair, and ponytails. As night fell, the search grew urgent. Floodlights were brought in. A K-9 unit arrived. The dogs picked up Hannah's scent from her jacket and followed the route from school. But the trail ended abruptly near a small playground 2 blocks from the school, right at the edge of the parking lot. The scent disappeared, as if Hannah had gotten into a vehicle. That realization hit Laura like a physical blow. She collapsed on the couch, clutching Mr. Whiskers, sobbing that her baby might be hurt, scared, alone. Tom tried to stay strong, but the helplessness was crushing. They sat in their living room, surrounded by strangers in uniforms while their daughter was gone. The worst part was the not knowing. By 10 hours that night, over 150 people were searching. Churches organized prayer vigils. The story spread to news stations in Charleston and Columbia. Tips flooded in, most well-meaning but useless. Sergeant Carter worked through the night, coordinating efforts, chasing leads. She knew the first hours were critical. She also knew that in most abductions, the kidnapper was someone the family knew, so she started there. Were there custody issues, estranged relatives, family conflicts? Tom and Laura cooperated fully, answering every question, even the painful ones. The investigation found nothing. They were a normal, loving family with no secrets. Attention turned to registered offenders in the area. All were located and cleared with solid alibis. As the first night wore on, the searchers' mood shifted from frantic hope to grim resolve. Volunteers went home to sleep, promising to return at dawn. Others kept going, unwilling to stop. Tom and Laura didn't sleep. They sat in silence, the house too quiet without Hannah's chatter. They waited for news that never came. The sun rose on Friday with no sign of Hannah Brooks. The search resumed at first light. More volunteers arrived. The FBI was notified. The case was treated as a possible abduction, and the question that haunted everyone remained unanswered. Where was Hannah? The sun rose. On Friday, April 25, 1991, and Willow Creek woke up to a town that had changed overnight. The streets that had always felt safe now carried an undercurrent of fear. Parents walked their children to school instead of letting them ride bikes. Strangers were noticed more, and everywhere people were talking about Hannah Brooks. The search resumed at dawn with even greater intensity. Volunteers from neighboring towns arrived by the busload, many having seen the news the night before and feeling compelled to help. The Willow Creek Police Station had become a makeshift command center, with maps spread across tables, phones ringing off the hook, and coffee pots brewing nonstop. Sergeant Evelyn Carter had barely slept. She'd spent the night reviewing every detail, re-interviewing Olivia Grant and her mother, speaking with the crossing guard who'd been at the school gate that afternoon. Nothing new emerged, but she refused to let anything slip through the cracks. The FBI arrived around 9:00 a.m. Two agents, Special Agent Daniel Hayes and Special Agent Karen Ruiz, who specialized in child abductions. They brought additional resources, more search dogs, forensic teams, and a profiler to help narrow down potential suspects. They immediately set up interviews with everyone who'd had contact with Hannah in the days leading up to her disappearance. Mrs. Callahan, Hannah's teacher, was questioned in detail. She described Hannah as a happy, well-adjusted child, no signs of fear or unusual behavior. Olivia Grant was interviewed again, this time with her mother present, and she tearfully admitted she'd been distracted that afternoon, talking to another friend instead of waiting for Hannah. She hadn't realized Hannah wasn't right behind her until she got home. Other students were interviewed too. One boy in Hannah's class said he thought he'd seen her talking to someone near the playground after school, but he couldn't remember who or what they looked like. It was a vague lead, but the agents followed it. They asked for a sketch artist to work with the boy. The resulting drawing was too indistinct to be useful. The playground where the scent trail had ended became the focal point. Officers combed every inch of it: the swings, the slide, the sandbox, the parking lot. They looked for tire marks, footprints, anything that might suggest a vehicle had been there. Nothing conclusive turned up, but one witness provided what felt like the first real break. An older man named Mr. Raymond Ellis, who lived across from the playground on Maple Street, told investigators he'd been sitting on his porch that Thursday afternoon around 3:20. He remembered seeing several kids walking past, including a little girl with brown hair and ponytails. He also noticed a car parked near the playground entrance, a dark green or dark blue sedan, older model, with the engine running. Mr. Ellis said the car had been there for about 10 minutes before he went inside to answer the phone. When he came back out, it was gone. He hadn't seen anyone get in or out, hadn't noticed anyone approach the girl. But the detail stuck with Sergeant Carter. Why would someone sit in a running car on a mild afternoon? It didn't make sense unless they were waiting for something or someone. The agents asked for a more detailed description of the car. Mr. Ellis couldn't recall the make or model, just that it was a four-door, maybe a Ford or Chevrolet, with tinted windows, no license plate. It was frustratingly vague, but it was something. They put out a bolo, be on the lookout, for a dark-colored sedan in the region. Media coverage exploded. Hannah's photo was on the front page of every newspaper in South Carolina. Local stations ran her picture hourly. The national networks picked it up by Friday evening. Laura appeared at her first press conference that afternoon, flanked by Sergeant Carter and the FBI agents. She looked exhausted, her eyes red and swollen, but she spoke directly to the camera. "If you have my Hannah," she said, her voice trembling, "please let her go. She's just a little girl. She needs her mommy and daddy. If you're watching this, please, bring her home." Her words broke hearts across the state. Tips poured in, sightings of little girls in green sedans, in gas stations, in malls hundreds of miles away. Every lead was checked. Most were false alarms. A few were heartbreaking. One call reported a child matching Hannah's description at a rest stop in North Carolina, but it turned out to be a girl traveling with her grandmother. Each dead end hit the Brooks family like a fresh wound. The search on the ground continued relentlessly. Divers swept the nearby creeks and ponds. Helicopters with thermal imaging flew over the surrounding woods. Volunteers formed human chains to walk through fields and forests, calling Hannah's name until their voices gave out. By the end of the first week, the Brooks home had become a hub of activity. Laura's sister flew in from Atlanta to help. Tom's parents arrived from Charleston, taking over the kitchen to feed the volunteers and investigators. The dining room table was covered in maps, tip sheets, and coffee mugs. The phone lines were hot with incoming calls. Caleb and Grace were struggling. Caleb, the oldest, tried to act strong, but he spent hours in the backyard staring at the treehouse he and Hannah used to play in. Grace cried herself to sleep every night, clutching one of Hannah's stuffed animals. Tom and Laura did their best to keep things normal for them, but it was impossible. The house felt incomplete, like a puzzle missing its most important piece. 1 week after Hannah vanished, the FBI's Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team held a strategy session. They'd conducted hundreds of interviews, followed up on thousands of tips, searched thousands of acres. No physical evidence, no witnesses who'd seen Hannah after 3:15, no ransom demand. The lack of a ransom note was troubling. In cases where children were taken for money, contact usually came quickly. The absence suggested something else. Either the abduction wasn't about money, or the kidnapper had no intention of returning Hannah, or worse, she was no longer alive. No one said that last part out loud to the Brooks family, but the fear hung in the air. The investigation expanded. Every adult who'd had regular contact with Hannah was interviewed. Teachers, coaches, Sunday school teachers, neighbors. Was there anyone who'd shown too much interest? Anyone who'd been overly friendly? Nothing alarming came up. Hannah's life had been ordinary, safe, unremarkable in all the ways that matter. 2 weeks after the disappearance, the FBI suggested Tom and Laura take polygraph tests. It was standard procedure, they explained, a way to rule out family involvement so resources could focus elsewhere. Both agreed immediately. The tests were administered and both passed without issue. The media began to shift. Early coverage had been sympathetic. Now some outlets started asking questions. Why hadn't the family been more careful? Was the school negligent? Were there unreleased details? Speculation crept in. For Tom and Laura, each article felt like salt in the wound. Their private grief had become public property. 1 month after Hannah vanished, a massive volunteer search was organized, called Bring Hannah Home. Nearly 2,200 people from across the state participated. They walked grids through fields, forests, and abandoned lots. The search lasted 4 days and turned up nothing but trash and old clothing that didn't belong to Hannah. The failure was a turning point. The intensity began to wane. Volunteers had jobs and families to return to. Media coverage slowed. The case started its slow slide toward cold case status. Tom went back to work after 6 weeks. Not because he wanted to, but because bills needed paying. He threw himself into repairs and oil changes, anything to keep his mind busy. At home, he avoided Hannah's room. Laura went in every day, sitting on the bed, holding Mr. Whiskers, breathing in the fading scent of her daughter. They kept her room exactly as it was, drawings on the walls, toys on the floor, clothes in the drawers. It was a silent promise that she would come back. But as months turned into years, that promise grew harder to keep. The Brooks family learned to live with the absence. Caleb and Grace grew up in a house where Hannah's name was spoken carefully, where every birthday and holiday had an empty chair. They celebrated milestones, but always with the shadow of what should have been. Tom and Laura's marriage bent under the strain. They went to counseling, learned to communicate their grief differently. They joined support groups for families of missing children, finding solace in shared pain. Sergeant Evelyn Carter never let the case go. Even as it went cold, she reviewed the files regularly. She believed Hannah was still alive, a gut feeling she couldn't explain. There was no body, no crime scene, no evidence of violence. It felt more like Hannah had been taken and hidden away. The years passed. The world moved on. New tragedies took the headlines. But in Willow Creek and in the Brooks home, time stood still. Hannah Brooks remained missing. What no one knew was that hundreds of miles away, in a quiet suburb of Charlotte, North Carolina, a young woman was living a life built entirely on secrets. She'd been told her name was Sarah Jennings, that her mother had died when she was very young, that her father, William Jennings, had raised her alone in a world too dangerous for traditional school or close friends. She'd been homeschooled, kept close, told the outside world was full of risks. Sarah, who was really Hannah. Brooks had no memory of Willow Creek, of the Brooks family, of the playground where her life had changed forever. But as her father's health failed, the carefully constructed lie began to crack. The years slipped by in Willow Creek like pages turning in a book no one wanted to finish reading. By the second anniversary of Hannah's disappearance, the yellow ribbons that had been tied around every oak tree on Elmwood Avenue had faded to pale ghosts. The town moved forward. New families moved in. Businesses changed hands. Children grew up and graduated. But for the Brooks family, time remained trapped on April 24, 1991. Tom and Laura learned to function in a world without their youngest daughter. They went to work, paid bills, attended school events for Caleb and Grace. But the house never felt whole. Hannah's room stayed untouched, the lavender walls, the horse posters, Mr. Whiskers on the pillow. Laura still went in every morning, sat on the bed, and whispered good morning to the empty space. Caleb, now a teenager, became quieter. He stopped talking about Hannah at school because the pitying looks from classmates made him angry. Grace, who had always been the family's peacemaker, threw herself into books and animals. She volunteered at the local animal shelter, partly because she loved the work, partly because caring for creatures who couldn't speak reminded her of the sister who had vanished. Tom and Laura's marriage survived, but it was scarred. Grief hit them differently. Laura needed to talk about Hannah constantly, replaying memories, looking at old photos. Tom found comfort in silence, in fixing engines until his hands bled. They fought sometimes, quiet, exhausted arguments about whether they should keep Hannah's room as it was or start to move on. They always made up, always held on. They went to counseling, joined a support group for families of missing children, and even helped lobby for better missing persons laws in South Carolina. Sergeant Evelyn Carter never stopped working the case. Even after promotions, even after other detectives moved on to newer files, she kept Hannah's folder on her desk. She reviewed it every few months, chasing down any new tip that came in. Most were nothing. Someone thought they saw a girl who looked like Hannah in a crowd, or a psychic claimed to have a vision. Carter followed them all anyway. She had her own theory. The abduction was opportunistic. Someone had seen Hannah walking alone, seized the moment, and disappeared before anyone could react. The dark sedan Mr. Ellis had seen was the key, but they'd never been able to trace it. No plates, no make, no model, just a ghost car. Carter also believed, though she had no proof, that Hannah might still be alive. There had been no body, no blood, no crime scene. It felt different from the cases that ended in tragedy. She couldn't explain it, but she refused to close the file. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles north in a modest ranch house on the outskirts of Charlotte, North Carolina, a young woman lived a life carefully insulated from the world. Her name was Sarah Jennings. At least that's what she'd always been told. Sarah believed her mother had died in a car accident when she was very small. She believed her father, William Jennings, had raised her alone, moving frequently to escape painful memories. She believed the world outside their home was too dangerous for public school, too full of strangers who couldn't be trusted. So she was homeschooled, using workbooks and library books William carefully selected. William was not cruel in the obvious ways. He never hit her. He fed her well, taught her to read and write, bought her clothes and books. He showed affection, hugs, bedtime stories, praise for good grades. But he controlled everything. She was never allowed to play outside alone. She rarely saw other children. When they went to the grocery store or the library, he was always there, watching. He told her it was for her safety, that he had lost too much already. Sarah accepted this because it was all she knew. She had no memories of a life before Charlotte. Occasionally, fragments surfaced. Dreamlike images of a swing set, a woman's gentle voice, a stuffed bunny. But William explained them away as dreams or memories of her mother before the accident. She believed him. As she grew older, William allowed small freedoms. She could go to the library alone if she promised to stay inside and come straight home. She attended a small church youth group once a week, always accompanied by him. The people there saw a quiet, polite girl raised by a devoted widower. No one questioned it. Sarah excelled at her studies. She loved drawing, filling notebooks with horses, landscapes, imaginary families. She dreamed of becoming an artist, though William gently discouraged it, saying the art world was too unstable. She never argued. She loved her father. He was her whole world. The first real crack appeared when Sarah was 28, in the spring of 2014. William had been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's 5 years earlier. The disease progressed slowly at first, but then accelerated. He began forgetting names, repeating stories, getting lost in familiar places. Sarah became his primary caregiver, cooking, cleaning, driving him to appointments. One evening in March, during a particularly bad episode, William sat in his recliner, staring at the wall. Sarah brought him a cup of tea. He looked up, eyes cloudy, and whispered, "Hannah, I'm so sorry. I never meant... I just wanted a daughter." Sarah froze. "Who's Hannah, Dad?" William blinked, confused. "You are. You're Hannah." Then the moment passed. He smiled and asked what was for dinner. Sarah tried to dismiss it as confusion, but the name lodged in her mind like a splinter. Hannah. Why did it feel familiar? Over the next weeks, it happened again. In his disoriented moments, William would call her Hannah, mutter about Georgia, about a school, about being afraid of getting caught. Sometimes he cried, saying, "Your real parents must hate me." In clearer moments, he denied everything. He told her it was the disease talking, that she was Sarah, his daughter, and that was all that mattered. But Sarah couldn't let it go. She began searching the house when he was asleep or at doctor appointments. She looked through old boxes in the attic, tax returns, bank statements, photo albums. There was nothing about her birth, no birth certificate, no hospital records, no photos of her as a baby. The earliest picture was one William had taken when she looked about 7 or 8, already living in North Carolina. It was as if her life had begun in the middle. One afternoon, while William napped, Sarah opened the laptop he usually kept locked. She typed into the search bar, "Missing girl named Hannah." The results were overwhelming. Missing children named Hannah from all over the country. She scrolled, heart pounding, until she saw it, a photo on a cold case website, a little girl with wavy brown hair and ponytails, smiling in a yellow dress. The caption read, "Hannah Brooks, age 6, missing from Willow Creek, South Carolina since April 24, 1991. If you have any information, please contact the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division." Sarah stared at the photo for a long time. The eyes, the smile. It felt like looking in a mirror from another time. She did the math. If Hannah Brooks had been 6 in 1991, she would be 29 now. Sarah was supposed to be 28, but William had always been vague about her exact birthday. Her hands trembled as she clicked the link and read the story. The disappearance, the massive search. The family left behind, parents Tom and Laura, siblings Caleb and Grace. A photo of the family, Tom with grease-stained hands, Laura with kind eyes, the older kids smiling. The article mentioned the pink shirt with a rainbow Hannah had been wearing that day. A flash of memory hit Sarah like a wave. Soft pink fabric, a rainbow arc, the feeling of running home from school. She spent hours reading every article she could find. None of it triggered clear memories, but it felt like déjà vu, stronger, deeper. She cried without knowing why, a grief for people she didn't remember. For days she wrestled with what to do. Part of her wanted to call the police immediately. Part of her was terrified. What if it was a coincidence? What if William really was her father? What if confronting this meant losing the only family she'd ever known? The decision was forced when William's condition worsened rapidly. He suffered a severe stroke and was hospitalized. Doctors said he might not recover. Sarah sat by his bed, holding his frail hand. When they were alone, she leaned close. "Dad, who am I? Please, tell me the truth. Am I Hannah Brooks?" William's eyes fluttered open. His voice was weak, barely a whisper. "Yes," he said. "I'm sorry. I took you. I just wanted a family." He squeezed her hand once, then drifted away. Sarah sat there stunned, tears streaming down her face. Everything she knew had been a lie. She stepped into the hallway and made the call. "My name is Sarah Jennings," she told the operator. "But I think I might be Hannah Brooks. I think I was kidnapped 23 years ago." The call Sarah made from the hospital hallway changed everything. The dispatcher stayed calm and professional, but Sarah could hear the shift in tone when she mentioned the name Hannah Brooks. Within minutes, officers from the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department arrived. They took her statement in a quiet room away from the hospital bustle. Sarah repeated everything: William's confused ramblings, the missing records, the photo of the little girl who looked like her, the confession in the hospital bed. The officers listened intently. They explained that they would need to verify her story, but the details were compelling enough to treat as credible. While Sarah was being interviewed, other officers went to William's room. He was barely conscious, but they read him his rights and placed him under arrest for kidnapping. Even if he never stood trial, the formal charge was important. The South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, Escalating, was notified immediately. Sergeant Evelyn Carter, now retired for 5 years but still in touch with her former colleagues, received a phone call that made her sit down hard. "Evelyn," her old partner said, "we think we've found Hannah Brooks. She's alive. She's in North Carolina, and she just called it in herself." Carter's voice cracked. "Are you sure?" "Not 100% yet," he said, "but everything lines up. We're moving fast." Carter didn't hesitate. She got in her car and drove straight to Charlotte. The next step was DNA testing. Sarah provided a buccal swab. Sled still had samples from Hannah's childhood. Belongings, hair from her brush, saliva from an old toothbrush, collected in 1991. They also contacted Tom and Laura Brooks for fresh samples. The call to the Brooks family came late that night. Laura answered the phone, as she often did when sleep wouldn't come. The sled agent was gentle. "Mrs. Brooks, I need you to sit down. We have a potential lead on Hannah. A young woman in North Carolina believes she might be your daughter. We're running DNA to confirm, but we need your samples for comparison. We should have preliminary results within 48 hours. Laura couldn't speak. She made a sound that was half sob, half gasp. Tom rushed in, took the phone, listened. His face went through a dozen emotions: disbelief, hope, fear. "Yes," he said. "Yes, we'll come right now." They called Caleb and Grace, who were both living nearby. The whole family gathered at the house that night, unable to sleep. They talked about Hannah in ways they hadn't in years, sharing memories, laughing through tears, terrified it might all be a mistake. In Charlotte, Sarah waited in a hotel room arranged by the police. She couldn't go back to the house she'd shared with William. Everything familiar had been stripped away. She sat on the bed, staring at the wall, trying to imagine the family she'd been stolen from. Would they want her? Would they see her as a stranger? How do you become a daughter again after 23 years? The DNA results came back faster than expected. The samples matched. The genetic markers were conclusive. Sarah Jennings was Hannah Brooks. After 23 years, the missing girl had been found alive. The news broke like a dam bursting. National headlines screamed, "Cold case solved, South Carolina girl missing." Since 1991, found alive. Hannah's school photo appeared alongside recent images of Sarah. Reporters swarmed Willow Creek and Charlotte. The Brooks family's phone rang nonstop until they unplugged it. A press conference was held in Columbia to announce the resolution. Authorities protected the family's privacy while confirming the basics. Hannah Brooks had been located, she was safe, and the suspect, a man in his late 70s, was in custody. The question everyone asked, why? Investigators dug into William Jennings's background. The picture that emerged was tragic. In his early 20s, William had been married. His wife was pregnant with their first child. She died in childbirth along with the baby. The loss shattered him. He never remarried, never had children. Over the years, he became increasingly isolated, struggling with untreated grief and depression. In 1991, while passing through South Carolina on a work trip, he'd seen Hannah walking alone near the playground. In his disturbed state, he saw an opportunity to fill the void in his life. It wasn't planned. He called out to her, perhaps said he knew her parents or was sent to pick her up. She got into the car. He drove north, crossed state lines, and started a new life in North Carolina. He had no criminal record. He moved frequently at first, then settled in Charlotte. He homeschooled her, kept her isolated, and convinced himself he was protecting her, that he was giving her a better life. He loved her in his own broken way, but it was a love built on theft. His final confession, triggered by Alzheimer's and guilt, had cracked the lie wide open. The first meeting between Hannah and her biological family was arranged with care. Therapists and law enforcement facilitated it in a private room at the SLED headquarters in Columbia, a neutral space away from cameras. Tom, Laura, Caleb, and Grace arrived early. They were nervous, hopeful, terrified. They'd been counseled extensively. Hannah had no memories of them. She'd lived an entire life as someone else. This was the beginning of a long process, not a fairy tale ending. When Hannah walked in, the room went silent. Laura made a small sound, a laugh mixed with a sob. Hannah looked so much like the little girl they'd lost, the same wavy brown hair, the same gentle eyes. But she was an adult now, tall, composed, and uncertain. "Hannah," Laura whispered, taking a tentative step. Hannah looked at her, eyes filling with tears. "I don't remember you," she said softly. "I'm sorry. I don't remember any of it." Laura shook her head, tears streaming. "That's okay, sweetheart. You were so young. We don't expect you to remember. We're just so grateful you're alive." Tom hung back, eyes wet. Caleb stared in shock. Grace stepped forward first, offering a small smile. "You're really here," Caleb said, voice barely above a whisper. "All these years." They sat down. The therapist guided them. For 2 hours, they talked, cried, shared. Laura and Tom told stories about her childhood, the zoo game, the treehouse, Mr. Whiskers. They showed her photos. Hannah listened, looking at images of a little girl who was supposedly her, feeling like she was reading about someone else. She told them about her life as Sarah, about William, about the isolation, about loving him despite everything. She apologized for not remembering them. Everyone assured her she had nothing to apologize for. "You were taken," Tom said firmly. "None of this is your fault." The reunion was covered by the media, but the actual meeting stayed private. When the family emerged hours later, they gave a brief statement. Laura spoke, voice shaking. "Today we got our daughter back after 23 years. We're overwhelmed with joy. We ask for privacy as we begin to heal and get to know each other again. Hannah is a survivor, and we're so proud of her. We also want to thank everyone who never gave up, especially Sergeant Evelyn Carter." Carter, standing off to the side, wiped tears from her eyes. She'd carried this case for decades. Seeing Hannah alive, seeing the family together, felt like the weight of the world lifting. She approached the Brooks family afterward. Laura pulled her into a hug. "Thank you," Laura whispered. "Thank you for never giving up." Carter hugged her back, unable to speak. The weeks that followed were hard. Hannah moved to South Carolina but got her own apartment. She needed space to process. She started intensive therapy to work through the trauma of learning her entire identity was false, of losing the father she'd known, of building relationships with a family that felt like strangers. She struggled with complicated feelings toward William, anger at what he'd done, grief when he passed away just 2 weeks after her identity was confirmed. She attended his small funeral alone. The Brooks family gave her space while aching to make up for lost time. They learned to be parents to an adult daughter they didn't know. Caleb became her closest connection, patient, funny, never pressuring her to be the sister he remembered. They built a friendship that slowly turned into something deeper. Hannah legally changed her name back to Hannah Brooks, though she sometimes felt like neither name fully fit. She was someone new, shaped by two lives. She got her GED, enrolled in community college, and rediscovered her love of art. She began to build a life that honored both her stolen childhood and her reclaimed future. The months and years after Hannah's return were not the fairy tale ending anyone had imagined. They were messy, painful, beautiful, and slow. Hannah Brooks moved into a small apartment in Columbia, South Carolina, just a short drive from her family. She needed her own space, a place where she could process the enormity of what had happened without the constant pressure of being the missing girl who came back. She started weekly therapy sessions with a specialist in trauma and identity issues. The work was hard. She grieved the childhood she never had, the family she didn't remember, and even the man who had raised her. She felt guilty for mourning William, but the therapist helped her understand that love and betrayal could coexist. Hannah legally reclaimed her name, but she kept Sarah as a middle name. Hannah Sarah Brooks. It felt like a quiet way to honor both lives. She got her GED quickly, having been well educated at home, and enrolled in community college to study graphic design. Drawing had always been her escape, and now it became her path forward. Her early pieces were abstract, swirls of color representing confusion and loss, but over time they evolved into something warmer. Portraits of families, landscapes that felt like home, images of little girls playing under oak trees. She reconnected with her siblings slowly. Grace became her closest confidant. They went to coffee shops, watched movies, talked about everything except the past at first. Grace shared stories about growing up without her, about how she'd always wondered what Hannah would have been like. Hannah listened, sometimes cried, but also laughed. They built a new bond, one sister at a time. Caleb was more guarded. He'd carried the weight of being the big brother for too long. But he showed his care in small ways, fixing her leaky faucet, inviting her to baseball games, teasing her gently about her terrible taste in music. Over time, the teasing turned into real conversations. They became friends first, siblings second. Tom and Laura struggled the most. They wanted to make up for 23 lost years, but they knew they couldn't. They learned to let Hannah set the pace. They invited her to Sunday dinners, but never pushed when she needed space. They kept Hannah's old room as a guest room now, with a few of her childhood drawings framed on the wall, a compromise between holding on and moving forward. The family went to therapy together. They talked about the guilt, the anger, the joy. There were setbacks. Days when Hannah felt overwhelmed and pulled away, days when Laura cried remembering what they'd lost. But they kept showing up. William's estate was small, but the court awarded Hannah what there was, enough to help her start fresh. She used it to pay for school and therapy, and donated the rest to a foundation for missing children. As time passed, Hannah began speaking publicly, but only when she was ready. She gave a few interviews, sharing her story to raise awareness about long-term missing persons cases and the importance of never closing files. She spoke at a conference for families of missing children, where she met other survivors. She told them, "You can survive even when the world tells you it's over, and sometimes the missing come home." The media interest faded eventually. News stories took over. But in Willow Creek, Hannah's return brought a quiet healing. The town held a small ceremony at the playground where her trail had ended. A scholarship fund in her name at Willow Creek Elementary for students interested in art or criminal justice. It was funded by donations from people who had searched for her all those years ago. Sergeant Evelyn Carter kept a photo on her mantle, the Brooks family hugging Hannah the day she came home. She still gave occasional talks at law enforcement conferences, emphasizing persistence. "Never assume a case is hopeless," she said. "Sometimes the answer comes when you least expect it." Years later, Hannah reflected on her journey in a quiet interview for a book about solved, cold cases. "I lost 23 years," she said. "I lost my name, my family, my childhood. But I also survived. I found my way back. The scars are still there, and they always will be. But I'm learning to live with them. I'm Hannah Brooks, and I'm still here. The Brooks family celebrated milestones together now. Birthdays with extra cake, holidays with an extra chair that was no longer empty. They renewed their vows in a small ceremony, with Hannah and her siblings standing beside them. Caleb got married, and Hannah was part of the wedding party, watching her brother say his vows, feeling like she belonged. The case of Hannah Brooks became a landmark. It showed the power of DNA databases, the value of keeping cold cases active, and the importance of hope. It reminded law enforcement that no body, no crime wasn't always true. It reminded families that missing didn't always mean gone forever. For the thousands of families still waiting, Hannah's story offered something rare. Proof that miracles, though rare, can happen. That cold cases can warm up, that the missing can be found. And sometimes, after decades of darkness, there can be light. If you've been with us through this entire story, from the day Hannah vanished to the day she came home, thank you for listening. Stories like this remind us why we keep searching, why we never give up. If this touched you, please like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear a story of hope, and subscribe to Unsolved Stories for more true crime tales, both solved and unsolved. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Drop a comment below. What did you think of Hannah's journey? Have you followed a cold case that stayed with you? And if you or someone you know has information about a missing person, no matter how small it seems, please contact law enforcement. Your tip could be the key that brings someone home. Some cases end in graves, some end in heartbreak, but every once in a while, they end with a heartbeat, a reunion, and a second chance. Hannah Brooks's story is one of those rare ones. She survived. She found her way home. And in the end, that's what matters.